Welcome back. Well, Dr. Austin Tam-George joins us now. He's the Director, Institute of Communication Studies in Lagos, and also a former lecturer, University of Cape Town, South Africa. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Well, focusing on this election rescheduling, I mean, some even use the word, who knows, unconsciously, cancellation. Elections will still hold. But for the entire scenario, what's your assessment of what you've seen and heard about what has been said about it?
Well, I think that there is absolutely nothing to worry about when it comes to how we stick to our calendar in this electoral process. I think that what is constitutionally sacrosanct as a date, as far as the electoral process is concerned, is May 29th. Remember that in the course of your interview with the former guest, Mr. Paduku, you reminded him that in 2011, similar changes were made by INEC. We didn't feel at that time that the process was going to derail. So what I think is that we tend to be a little bit too dramatic about these changes. I think that what is important is that in the last analysis, people should have an opportunity to vote. At the time the INEC chairman gave the press conference announcing the extension of the date, over 20 million registered voters had not received their PVCs. And I thought that was a very significant amount of people who potentially were going to be disenfranchised. So what I think is that this extension gives them the latitude in terms of time and space to make sure that each and every person who is willing and ready to vote has the PVC to vote. So I don't think that we should over-dramatize the extension. We are well within the constitutional framework. We are well within the electoral process. And I think that we are just on course to go. We shouldn't over-dramatize the extension, I think.
The analogy I've heard some give about what happened in 2011
yes.
and now is because they cite certain differences. At that time, we didn't have two strong parties. Now we have these two strong parties, and they're seriously doing what they can to outwit each other. And so what one party does, the other party interprets it politically. While some others may be just watching to see, look, give us a fair analysis of what, are they right from the point of law or not? But they will play politics. And so one party could think the other is trying to outwit me. And so you're doing this, colluding with the other agencies to see that we lose, quote unquote, our momentum. That's what
No, I don't think that would be a fair analysis, frankly. I think that elections everywhere in the world are very contentious and noisy, quarrelsome activities. It's about power. So people will bring all kinds of mischaracterizations when it comes to how the umpire of the process behaves. But I think that we should keep our eyes on the ball. And the ball is the electoral process doesn't even face any threat of derailment. What's important is that the process has been put in place. We have over 2 months or so up to the time of handover. And within this period, any kind of lack of preparedness on the part of INEC especially could easily be accommodated. And I think that is what the INEC has done. They've announced a change, and in fact, 2 days ago extended the amount of time that potential voters can go and collect their PVCs. Over 20 million people. That's more than the population of Niger Republic, more than the population of Benin Republic. These are massive numbers. And I think that the mere prospect of over 20 million people being disenfranchised ought to chastise us to say, look, what can we do in terms of giving some space, within the process to allow for these people to take their PVCs. That's one part. The other part I want to emphasize, which hasn't really been discussed in the public analysis so far, is the way that we talk about the security situation in the northeast of the country. I suspect that there's a sense in which we are a bit more manipulative, more cynical in the way we refer to those people in the Northeast. We tend to think about them only as voters, fulfilling the expectations and ambitions of political parties. Hardly these days do we talk about them as victims of a brutal warfare. hardly do we focus on whether they are getting sufficient relief materials. My suspicion is that those people in the Northeast who are displaced around the country and who are, in fact, refugees in other countries, Nigeria, Chad, and the rest, their primary concern, I suspect, is not even to vote. They want to make sure they go back to stability in their lives. They want to make sure that their children are back to school. They want to make sure that they get sufficient relief materials. We do not seem to have as much emphasis on these humanitarian issues. Instead, what we seem to be emphasizing is whether these people can add up to the votes that can make certain political parties to succeed. And I think that is a very cynical and exploitative way of looking at people, citizens who are suffering in this brutal war. So what I think is that, and I think Mark Baer in one of your earlier programs mentioned this point, there is no sufficient attention to the humanitarian issues that affect those people in the Northeast. All we want to emphasize is to see how we can totalize their votes and pursue specific political agenda. And I think that's a very manipulative and cynical way of looking at things.
Well, it's interesting that, you bring up this perspective, because I do know that severally, we did focus on the humanitarian aspect of this, at least on this program,
yes,
for a while. And it turned out that later on, discussions came, elections came,
yeah,
and it would seem that somewhat the conversation also shifted.
Yes.
You also saw that parley that INEC had with the stakeholders, in quotes, from that particular region. And elections was very much on their mind. They figured that it would be double jeopardy for those people, that first of all, they've lost homes, they've lost a lot of things, and then still will be disenfranchised. And it would seem that to guarantee that, INEC will put them into consideration, there was also a distribution of PVCs there. If we're to go by the figures of INEC, they claim that as much as 80% distribution of PVCs have been achieved in that area. The question will be, how was INEC able to achieve that under the circumstance, and yet security agents tell us that they cannot guarantee security in that particular area for the elections?
Well, the flip side of that question will be to say, how was INEC able to distribute as many PVCs in a war zone, and yet Lagos State, that has the largest population, one of the largest populations in Nigeria, doesn't have up to 60% of the PVCs distributed. And in the whole of the South, where there is peace, we don't have as much PVCs distributed. And these are peaceful zones. So you see, what tends to crystallize for me is that we need to emphasize that as many people as possible, whether internally or externally displaced, or whether they are located in the North Central, or whether they're in the South, whether they're in the Southeast, let us make sure we use this opportunity of the extension of the period to have as many PVCs distributed to potential voters as possible. You see, my sense is that INEC has not been fully criticized the way I think they deserve. We've had 4 years to prepare for this. In 2011, when we had the last election, we knew constitutionally that 2015 would come and the elections will be held, and that there's going to be a massive logistical nightmare if we didn't prepare enough for it. So we've, in effect, had 4 years to prepare and distribute these PVCs. But elections, just a second. Election is not mysticism. It's not mysticism. People knew that elections will come in 2015. Distribute these materials, make sure you roll out the massive logistical requirements to get this thing done. What we have now is scandalous, and I'm happy that INEC appears to have realized this and said, look, let us make an extension, and then let whoever wants to vote go and get their PVCs. My further suggestion, in fact, in order to widen the scope of the net of those who will vote, is to say, look, in addition to the PVCs, if you have valid temporary voters registration card, it should be admissible at the point.
Perhaps